It's been a bleak period for the mining, metal, clothing and textile sector, with workers facing an uncertain future. Now, recently, the mining and metals company Sibanye-Stillwater announced the restructuring process potentially affecting more than 3,000 employees and over 900 contractors. Now, as we mark International Workers' Day today, we reflect on how workers in the mining, manufacturing and other sectors have been impacted upon in the past 30 years of our country's democracy. And we joined this morning virtually by Andre Kriel, who's the spokesperson of the Southern African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, SACTWU. We also have with us this morning Ndumiso Kubheka, who is the chief economist at KH Research Equity Partners, and hoping to be joined by Phakamile Hlubi-Majola of Numsa in a short while. But gentlemen, thanks so much to you, Andre and Ndumiso, for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live and happy Workers' Day.
Happy Workers' Day morning to you, and thank you for having us.
And thank you very much. And happy Workers' Day, or May Day, as it should properly be called, to all the workers in our country and all the workers globally. It's a monumentous day, crucially important for us. So thank you very much.
So let me start by taking a look at some of our viewers' sentiments that they sent in for us this morning, because, you know, it also puts into focus what it is that the workers are concerned about on a day like today. So here are some of the comments in response to our question of the day, and we also asked if anyone had any specific questions for our guest this morning. This one is from Sim, and Sim says, we are very far because those who are tasked with protecting workers are on the payroll of the employers. That is from Sim. And then just moving on to another one from Letswapo, who says, good labor legislation on paper, but workers in the workplaces are continuing to be exploited by the employers, because never in a million years has the Department of Labor carried out inspections at workplaces. That's Letswapo's contribution. And here's another one. Let's take this one for now, these three. Dupsazi says, the condition of workers is worsening. Unions are in cohabitation agreements with government in neoliberal policies, and this is to the detriment of workers. How do you explain farmers' conditions in the Western Cape and that of mine workers in the mines? Workers are suffering. So those are some of the sentiments of our viewers this morning. Obviously doesn't make for great reading. Andre, let me start with you. How do you respond to the viewers who have sent in those sentiments, basically saying that there's a distrust between themselves and, of course, the leadership of the unions, because they feel as though in some instances the union leadership may be in the pockets of the employers?
Well, I think it is very important to respect the view of workers. I think it is important to take note of what they're saying, but I think from personal experience that those trade unions that I've been associated with have shown nothing else but commitment to the struggles and the interests of workers. And I've had broad experience across unions, across federations, and we've had good relations with all of them. But it's important to say, yes, there are some who are not putting the interests of workers first, and that must be condemned in the strongest sense of the word. That's our view.
And Ndumiso, let me hear from you. You know, what do you make of this, and what our viewers are essentially saying here with regards to how they view what's playing out in the workplace, looking at how much trade unions have contributed over the past 30 years of democracy in South Africa? How would you assess their representation of worker interests?
I think in terms of assessing the representation of worker interests in the context of what the South African labour market has undergone over the last 30 years, there are two things I think that become quite clear. Number one, the institutional capacity that is required in order to ensure that the representation of worker interest is done at the level at which legislation requires, and of course, where enhancements are required, that those are also factored in. Secondly, are the dramatic levels of transformation that the labor market in South Africa and internationally has undergone over the last 30 years. A case in point would be some of the cyclical effects that we've seen of commodity prices on things such as wage growth and, of course, the retrenchment patterns that we've seen in the mining and manufacturing sectors in South Africa. We've also seen the input and the important role that the introduction of the national minimum wage has played in ensuring that the workers' rights are also find expression in terms of wage patterns and wage growth in our context. This has also, I think, been coupled by an evolving economy that has also been transforming, where we've seen a declining contribution of manufacturing as a percentage of GDP over the last years, being overtaken by sectors such as finance, which is illustrative, I think, of the transformation of the South African economy, that it's undergoing a more knowledge-intensive and services-based economy, and therefore requires industrial policy interventions that can respond to those alterations that we're seeing taking place.
Now, we are joined by Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, who's, of course, Numsa's spokesperson, did indicate she will be joining the conversation. Phakamile, welcome. And just to get straight into it, you know, there have been perceptions that labor unions, for example, are perhaps more focused on the country's politics and leadership squabbles instead of taking care of worker interests. Do you agree with that? How do you respond to those who advance that view?
Good morning, Sakina. Good morning to your viewers. Please accept my apology for doing this interview from the car, but I'm literally on the road as I speak to you. On the issue regarding the point that was made by one of your viewers about trade unions being concerned about politics, I think there's two aspects to what that person is saying. First of all, I think we must start off by saying that trade unions continue to be relevant. Much of the progress that we've seen in workplaces, if we're looking just at South Africa, it's because of the work of unions. We now have a far more progressive labor regime than we had 30 years ago. That labor regime has guaranteed things like a 45-hour work week, paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave, protections for women against sexual harassment, all of these things that have resulted in a democratization of the workplace are because of generations of struggles of workers in unions, of strikes and rolling mass action that workers would have embarked on to transform the workplace so that it is more democratic and is more beneficial to workers and their families. On the issue of some of the unions having relationships with the governing party, I think Numsa would certainly agree on that as that being a problem, which would be why in 2013 Numsa broke away from the alliance, because we felt that the ANC government was not living up to the promises and the demands that workers had made. The working class is responsible for ending apartheid. The working class is responsible for the political power that the ANC government has, and yet the ANC was completely ignoring the working class in terms of the macroeconomic framework that it was implementing, which was hurting and continues to hurt workers and their families. And as long as we have that situation, it does compromise the outcomes and the demands that workers make, because effectively what you do see happening in many aspects, if you look at, for example, public sector wage negotiations, you have a situation where leadership of trade unions that have strong relationships within the alliance make compromises because of, for political expediency at the expense of the working class. And I think we need to have very clear lines between ourselves as workers and the employers. And this is the realization that Numsa came to in 2013, which is why we broke away from the alliance. Unfortunately, we were expelled by COSATU in 2014, but the fact of the matter is that it does not serve workers in South Africa to be in bed with a governing party when the same governing party goes out of its way to ignore the demands of workers and to pander to capital at every opportunity.
So Andre, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that if you wish, but I also want you to touch on the issue of exploitation. You know, Phakamile did a good job there of outlining some of the gains that have been made in trying to protect workers' rights, but what about the exploitation that continues in the workplace 30 years into democracy?
Well, I think the introductory comments to the session does not square with our experience. If I take our industry, and I think this is a broad experience of trade unions in the federation to which we are affiliated, which is COSATU, our experience is much, much more positive. Not to say that there weren't problems, but if you look over the last 30 years, all the gains that we have made in the labor market, all the gains that we have made relating to worker rights, all of that have come because you've had a government which wasn't censored, which wasn't perfect, but certainly it was not anti-worker.
So just in terms of the exploitation...
Take, for example, our industry, the textile. Well, that is what I would like to say. I think the labor market institutions regime that have been introduced by the current government has been very positive in protection of exploitative conditions. Those will have to be combated, and certainly the labor laws exist. So it is useless having all the labor laws and not having strong trade unions and committed trade unions that utilize it to implement and to roll back where instances of exploitation exist. But largely, I would say that it is not true that we are operating in an environment where there is exploitative conditions that are being created through government policy or through any other instruments that are introduced at a legislative level. In fact, the facts show that the contrary is true.
So, Ndumiso, I want to bring you in here because, you know, if you look at the exploitation that still goes on, if you talk to the trust deficit that exists between some workers, of course, and the labor unions, those are, of course, issues that need to be addressed. But there is also, you know, issues with regard to unions and finances. If you look at some of the stories that have hogged the headlines of late, where the investment arms, you know, are investing, but how much of that is actually known to the membership, the rank and file of these trade unions? And do you think they could do better in terms of those investments and how that actually benefits their members?
Certainly, I think there's always room to really extend and do far much better in terms of the requirements and the needs of workers in the South African context. I think this is particularly important because the South African economy is a small, open economy that is heavily integrated with other more developed economies around the world. And so when it comes to the investment arms of labor unions, I think the big challenge there is how to ensure that the returns that are able to be derived in those areas also speak to the transformation needs of the very same industries that they are currently operating in. I think when we look at the period between 2008 to 2023 in the latest data set from Stats SA, in the manufacturing sector, for example, we've seen the number of jobs moving from 1.8 million to around 1.4. And so the question and the thesis then becomes, how can we then drive much needed investment to really continue to value add the secondary sector of the manufacturing sector or mining sector in order to benefit workers broadly? This, I think, is a key opportunity, particularly when we look at the low levels of investment that we currently have in South Africa, sitting at around 16% of GDP, when we need around 30% plus of GDP investment in order to achieve levels of 4 to 5% growth. And so I think those are much needed areas. When we look at South Africa and the African case for workers, we see that only 10% of projects reach financial close in terms of investments, in terms of key projects that are labor intensive. And so there are significant opportunities there that I think labor unions and the investment arms thereof and other investment partners can be able to take advantage of as we're seeing the global economy transform, but to consistently stay ahead in order to meet and service the needs of workers in the local context.
And this, of course, always a sore point for the unions, Andre Phakamile, because people look at how the labor unions are spending money through their investment arms, and lots of questions arise from that. If we take, for example, Andre, last year, the manufacturing report published by Statistics South Africa showed that between 2005 and 2021, the clothing and textile industry lost just over 121,000 jobs. So, it speaks to perhaps some turbulent times, maybe even a bleak future, depending on where you want to take that from. But then, a few weeks ago, again, hogging the news headlines, your investment in the Segunjalo media, the investment into independent media there, and talking about whether that was a loan and, all sorts of things. But more importantly, if you look at the amount of money, 150 million. Then you go back a little while and you look at, was it the Trilinear investment, where you were said to have lost, again, quite a bit of money in that particular investment, over 200 million, 400 million is what the report says. So again, do you think that you are investing wisely? Do you think that those investments could be put to better use to actually protect your workers? And Phakamile, I'm going to come to you with a similar question in terms of union investment vehicles and what you are doing with the money. Andre, let's start with you.
Yeah. Look, I am going to be to the point. I think generally painting a picture that it is a general, that it is on the wrong track, that is misplaced. Certainly there are instances where that happen, and that must be exposed, and it must be dealt with decisively. I cannot speak for other trade unions, guarantee of regular reporting and of accountability to the constitutional structures of our trade union. And all of that is dealt with in that way. Coming to the specifics, if you take the Segunjalo matter, of which the judgment came out last week, look, our view is simple. There was a legitimate loan that was advanced to be camouflaged in our independent media is a different story. But the facts are clear. It's a clear loan. It is repayable. And it was a loan that was authorized by the constitutional structures of our union. If you take the linear matter, now in the public space, many of these things are reported incorrect. Investment company was not involved at all. It was completely separate from the trade union.
Our apologies there, Andre.
The reason why we see is...
Andre, my apologies there. So desperately want to hear that answer, but unfortunately that connection letting us down. But Phakamile, let me come to you. Again, over the years, we look at when we are talking about monies and unions, Numsa also no stranger to such headlines and those perceptions, because there was the story of the millions of rands that were siphoned from your insurance company, according to reports. Again, those monies, could it have been put to better use? Are your members wholly aware of what's happening? Are they actually benefiting from these investments that you are making?
Sakina, I think it's important for us to clarify what actually happened. Allegations were made by a faction that was attempting to collapse the union and collapse the Congress, that the current Numsa leadership was abusing the funds of the investment arm. And subsequently, 360 Life was placed under curatorship. As I speak to you now, that curatorship still exists. It is currently the longest curatorship in history. And whilst it has been under curatorship, the investment arm has actually miraculously continued to make profits even under extremely trying conditions. Not a stitch of evidence has actually emerged proving the allegations that were made that the leadership was siphoning millions for personal use. That has not been proven. That has not even been found by the curator. And yet the curatorship continues. And this is an issue that the investment arm is continuing to deal with and to fight. Now, on the issue as to why Numsa made a decision to set up the investment arm, first of all, it is not unusual for trade unions. We are not unique. Everywhere in the world, trade unions will take the monies of workers and set up investments for the benefit of workers. In the case of Numsa, those investments resulted in the formation of a medical aid whose benefits are much, much more affordable for the average worker. It was designed in that way so that workers at Numsa would be able to access medical aid, and it has done so. It has also created a funeral fund, again, which is also much more affordable. At the time when these products were offered, both the medical aid and the funeral fund were far more affordable than what was available and what was being provided to by other companies. The investment arm has also created bursaries for thousands of children of Numsa members. So it is our view that this investment is something that is very important because it definitely assists us in dealing with other socioeconomic aspects that affect our members and that affect workers in general when it comes to the workplace. I do think that there is this perception that we, for example, are not accounting. Again, that is not true. Numsa holds constitutional meetings quarterly where we do provide detailed reports on everything to do with the union finances, anything to do that affects with workers, and we are audited by SARS as well as other regulated financial institutions.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But of course, it is May Day, as Andre says, Workers' Day, the whole day today. And thanks so much to our guests this morning. But of course, there'll be many more conversations throughout the day, no doubt. Feel free to respond to our question of the day as we move along. Andre Kriel is the spokesperson of SACTWU. Phakamile Hlubi-Majola is the spokesperson of Numsa. And of course, Ndumiso Kubheka, thanks also for your time, Chief Economist at the KH Research Equity Partners, talking to us about the role of labor unions in protecting jobs, the future faced by some of the working sectors. And of course, your views always welcome.